Good morning and afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Indigenous Women in Engineering, a panel discussion. I'm Elizabeth Johnson, one of your hosts for today, and I'm honored to bring you this inspiring conversation. We are so honored to have our speakers with us today. Before we begin, a quick note, we encourage you to engage by submitting your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A section. We're going to try to get to as many as possible during this discussion, but we natives, we like to talk, so we don't know how it's going to go. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. As I've said, I'm Elizabeth Johnson, the Native Initiatives Manager for SACNAS. I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. So yeah, it's Elizabeth Johnson Nishia, Adana and Lishinigi A, Kiani Nishla, Dotsana Jinabashtin, Torachini Dashache, Do Torachini Dashanella, Akut Ego Edenastan Nishla, Totat Denasha, and the Hosdo Eshokan. Native Initiatives Manager, SACNAS District Nashnish. I will now hand the mic over to my colleague, AJ Holder.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is AJ Holder. I'm Oglala Lakota, Winnebago, Wichita, Sac and Fox in Northern Cheyenne. I'm the program assistant here at SACNAS for Native Initiatives, and I'm so excited to have all you here today. I'll do my introduction real quick as well. Ang peti washte malakota na kirigirish na hochangda wiyaha macha na hanyu anchante washte na be chiuzapi mai khade raja Alexandra Holder hingaire na shahal raja tau choko tau hingaire na ma kerapana nump naga job wa unangshana. Welcome everyone. I hope you guys all have fun today. Also, with that being said, sorry, I will be doing the land acknowledgement. So before we begin, we take a moment to acknowledge the original stewards of the land we occupy. We recognize that we are joining this conversation from many places with its each own deep histories, cultures, and traditions shaped by Indigenous people. We honor the resilience, knowledge, and contributions of Native nations and Indigenous communities past and present, who continue to care for these lands, whose legacies shape the world we live in today. This acknowledgement is a call to reflect, learn, and take action in supporting Indigenous voices and self-determination. We encourage you to take a moment to recognize the lands you are on and to learn about these Indigenous peoples whose homelands you reside on. If you'd like to learn more, we invite you to visit nativeland.ca to explore the history and contemporary presence of Indigenous communities in your area.
Thank you, AJ. Now, before we get to our speakers, we like to keep you waiting a little bit. I'd like to extend an invitation to you all to join SACNAS and be part of a thriving STEM community. So at SACNAS, science, culture, and community are more than just buzzwords. They are the heartbeat of our organization. We love to create spaces where STEM students and professionals from historically excluded backgrounds can feel a true sense of belonging, can embrace their intersectional identities, and can be empowered to bring their whole selves to STEM. We invite you to become a SACNAS member today. As a member, you'll gain access to a nationwide network of diverse STEM professionals, students, and mentors, professional development opportunities, that's through webinars such as this one, workshops like our Leadership Institutes, and other leadership programs, mentorship and community support to help you grow in your STEM journey. You also get exclusive member discounts. We all like to save a little bit of money at our NDI STEM conference happening here in October, and also attending more SACNAS programs and events. And additionally, you'll have access and opportunities to showcase your research and connect with potential employers and collaborators, whether that is through webinars such as this, networking circles that we have, our mentoring program, Sacred, and also NDI STEM, where you can present your research. Or if you are a professional, you can be a speaker at our conference as well. Join us and be a part of the movement that's shaping the future of STEM. Sign up today. You can click the link in the chat with more details, or you can email me, which I'll also drop in the chat as well. I'll pass it off to AJ.
All right, this is the part everyone's been waiting for. So with that being said, today we have the privilege of hearing from three incredible Indigenous women who are making important impacts in the engineering world. They will be sharing their journeys, how their culture has shaped their careers, and offering advice for aspiring engineers. If you could go to the next slide, please. First, we welcome Akilah Martinez, who is also known as Glittering World Girl. Akilah is an award-winning Diné artist, creative technologist, and cultural bearer from the Navajo Nation. She masterfully bridges the gap between traditional indigenous culture and modern technology using mediums like video art and XR to drive language and cultural revitalization. Also joining us, we have Charitie Ropati, a dynamic civil engineer and environmental advocate. A recent graduate from Columbia University School of Engineering, Charity's work in civil engineering, climate justice, and STEM equity has already earned her national accolades, including recognition on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Last, but certainly not least, we have Gisella Lamas, an environmental engineer and lecturer at the University of Kentucky, Paducah. Dr. Lamas is actively involved in outreach opportunities with the Society of Women Engineers, Indigenous Peoples Affinity Group, a society which promotes and encourages girls in STEM. As a global engineer, she is a reviewer for the United Nations Environmental Program. Now let's dive in. I'll hand it off to Elizabeth.
Yes, let's dive in. I'll start with our first question. Now, I know we already did an introduction of you all, but can each of you briefly introduce yourselves and share what inspires you to pursue a career in engineering? We'll start with Akilah.
Most definitely. Yate Anotswa. Hi everyone. She Akilah Martinez Yanusha. My name is Akilah Martinez. Bahalan Denebekeat Nasha. I come from the Bread Springs community on the Navajo Nation, and I'm a creative technologist that focuses on augmented reality development, where I incorporate Indigenous language and culture revitalization. And what really inspired me to get into this field was really from a lifelong goal that I had developed when I was about the age of 3, which I think a lot of people, Indigenous people, can relate to. I had constantly witnessed my grandparents having to watch TV programming that was only offered in English while they were only Denebazad speakers. And since then, I kind of just really had a goal to create modern media that represents our language and culture. So that's where my inspiration came from, to really use forward-thinking, futuristic technologies to implement our language and culture.
Fantastic, thank you. Now let's pass it over to Gisella.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here and be invited and be part of this as a SWE member for the Indigenous Peoples AG. I guess I could say that what really inspired me to get into engineering was really trying to understand which route I would go, because I think it wasn't very clear then what engineering was. My dad was an engineer, but I thought he was a chef, and that's what he was doing as a chemical engineer, which is nothing to do with chemical engineering. But you know, from the family, he was the first one to be a person with a college degree, and others came afterwards, obviously. But my sister, who's in the college as well, she and I did the PhD together, and we are the first ones to ever do that in the family. So it was kind of like a pioneering type of thing to get to do that. And I think the important thing about Indigenous peoples is, like, when you get to know more your culture, you realize that the work you're doing right now is similar to what they used to do in the past. And so we're continuing with another name. And that's what environmental engineering is for me.
Thank you, and I'll pass it off to Charity.
Waka, hello everyone. My name is Charitie Ropati. Winga Yupuko Yupatunaguva. I'm Yupik and Samoan, and my given name is Aguva. Joining Kazadinak, Alaska. I originally come from the native village of Kazadinak, Alaska, which is a coastal community in Southwest. Let me know if you can hear me too, because there's some like music playing in the background. Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm specifically a water engineer, but I got my degree in civil engineering, and specifically focused on water resources. And I kind of got into engineering. It's a story I like sharing with everyone, but like most of our moms, they gently encourage us to do things sometimes that we don't want to do. And for me, it was this really incredible native STEM program. when I was 10 years old. And I joined the Alaska Native Science and Engineering program reluctantly, and it ended up changing my entire life. It's kind of what brought me to where I am today. And I realized that everything that we learned, everything that we know in the Arctic, the way that we live, the way that we hunt still, the way that we build our infrastructure, specifically our water infrastructure, our transportation, the way that we build our kayaks, it's rooted in science and engineering, but it also includes love. And this is knowledge that has been through trial and error for thousands of years. And so I grew up surrounded by that. And there was also this huge barrier that many communities, like my own face, specifically in the Southwest, but was this huge lack of water. There's a huge lack of water and sewer services. So I knew at a young age that I wanted to bring water back home to our community. And that's the current work that I do now. And I think, like most of us, when you're a young Native girl with this dream of becoming an engineer, it doesn't seem possible. But I remember always being surrounded by these shoulders of like Native women, specifically Alaskan Native women who, like Michelle Yachmanchip, Dr. Michelle Yachmanchip, she became one of the first Alaskan Native women to get her PhD in engineering. And I remember meeting her when I was 10, 11. And so she's had a huge impact in my pathway. And it's because, you know, representation matters in those spaces. So those are just those little stories that really got me into engineering. This is an attribute that I can give really to my mom. And like most of us, we can thank our mothers for doing that. So if it wasn't for my mom's encouragement, but also for her, she was one of the first people to like really solidify that dream and tell me that I can become an engineer and that I was born from that practice and that mechanism. And it's something that is in our blood. So yeah, I owe it to her, but yeah, super excited to talk more about this and to learn more about the other panelists. And I absolutely love SACNAS. We need more programs like this, and just it's had a huge impact on myself and my friends. So definitely join the community.
Thank you so much, Charity. So our next question is going to be, how do you see Indigenous knowledge and engineering coming together in your work? And we can start again with Akilah.
Most definitely. So XR technology, it's an umbrella term for augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. It's an emergent technology that is going to change every industry in the world and basically how the public is going to find information and find entertainment in the future. So starting with that, XR technology in itself is really different than traditional forms of technology, specifically pertaining to media. You know, we all know the different disparities that came with the technology of film and storytelling, also with other storytelling mechanisms like books and history books, biased history books of the past, and how Hollywood had an influence of creating a lot of stereotypes around cultural diversity. So with XR technology, since we're in the emerging part of the technology, it's really a space where we can really optimize oral storytelling, which is where I really kind of like that aspect as a culture revitalizationist and cultural barrier. So since it's an emerging technology, during the inception of XR technology, Indigenous people really have a chance right now to take ownership of storytelling during the emergence of XR technology, which is quite different than like film and Hollywood, where a lot of people from cultural backgrounds didn't have that opportunity. So that's one aspect of how Indigenous storytelling can really be infused with the inception of XR technology. And then also right now, as opposed to a traditional media form where it was kind of built off of a pyramid business model scheme where the people on the top get the most benefit of the storytelling and the dissemination of stories. It's different than that with XR technology, especially as Indigenous people are becoming more familiarized and professional and educated with financial systems and philanthropy, right now, what I'm noticing and what we're noticing is that with emerging technology and new forms of Indigenous finance product innovation, there's an actual possibility to create circular economic ecosystems using technology and emerging technology. What this means is that we can really have Indigenous lifeways reflected in new forms of economic structures that include every part of an epistemology, environment, of course, the storytelling and the dissemination of that through XR technology. So that's a huge advantage that we're seeing right now with XR technology and the kind of foundation that we can build off of this technology. So those are the two different type of ways that I feel like Indigenous points of views can get infused with the technology, because right now, while we're in the inception, we really have the opportunity to shape what's done with this technology for our communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll pass it off to Gisella.
I mean, there's like two points of view, I guess I would say, as a professional. As I was learning more about environmental engineering, how to do water treatment, and getting to know the community that my ancestry comes from, which is like in the desertic area of Peru, northern central. I was able to relate to everything that I was learning in class to something that we already done. And this is like, was a little bit confusing to me. And I talked to my professor at one point because I said, you're saying that this is something that you're inventing right now, but I've seen it in practice. And she came to me and said, yes, it's common, like especially in areas in which you really don't have any other option for water. And they did it in an intuitively way, and now they're putting names to it. So that was kind of like an interesting thing for me to see and change my perspective. So now as a faculty member, I try to bring that to the narrative as well, because most of the books that we have or learning engineering, they all have most Eurocentric names, which is so far from everything that we learn, which is like base math that comes from Asia, for example. So some of the questions that I introduce in the classroom is like, can you give me examples of, let's say, material science that I have to teach, of material work, alloys that have been done in the Americas? Can you give me examples in South America or another continent other than Europe? And they just, it's always like eye-opening, and I think they really enjoy. And the more I open my narrative about this and ask them to question this more, well, I live in Kentucky. There's a lot of people here that are Indigenous, and some of them still hide that. And that's a moment for them to open themselves and say, hey, did you know my grandpa is? And this is so nice for me to finally be able to say it. And I think that's like the two sides of it for me.
Thank you. I'll pass it off to Charitie.
Yeah, the ways that I see Indigenous knowledge becoming incorporated or just coming together with engineering, I always tell people that our ways of knowing, especially with what can be seen in the North and the Arctic with our communities, is that everything that we do is rooted in science and engineering. Our ability to survive in some of the harshest conditions, to continue to adapt, to relocate entire communities without the help of the federal government. These are things that we've always been doing. Like there's these buzzwords that people talk about, like climate adaptation or mitigated relocation. And to our people, it's like, we've been doing that like for the past 50, 60, 70 years. And I think it's kind of, for me, my work involves pushing that narrative and bringing more visibility to that, because some of the smartest people that I know in my community are those that don't hold degrees that historically were created to serve as settler colonial entities. Like my past school, I won't mention what's going on there now, but some of the smartest people that I know are my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my and these are people that didn't get up in education up until 3rd grade, but they're able to build kayaks that can withstand the harsh conditions of the Bering Sea, catch walrus and bring that into the community and share it with everyone. And the biggest issue that I see, especially with how engineers work, is that engineers work in silos. they work individually, and that's incredibly dangerous because it sets an incredibly dangerous precedent because, you know, how do you work with people? We should be doing engineering for people, engineering for humanity. And for our people, when we're building our infrastructure, our water infrastructure, we're doing it for the good of people. We're doing it because we want the person to, we're doing it out of love. And so I always try and bring that within my own work. And so I currently work as a water engineer here in New York City out of Burn. I absolutely love the company that I work at because it really aligns with everything that I've learned growing up, with this idea of how we build infrastructure that really aligns with nature. And one of my favorite architects is Douglas Cardinal from Canada. He's, if you don't know his work, definitely look him up, but his work is inspiring because he's building infrastructure that aligns with nature. And we need more of that because that's something that our ancestors and our current family members do today. So when I think about how I see Indigenous knowledge and engineering coming together in my work, it's just talking about it, but it's also, you know, how we do a community engagement when we're working on a project. How do we center the people? How do we make this information accessible instead of, you know, using terms that aren't understandable? But also when it comes to like understanding water, when engineers build infrastructure for groundwater, for example, or for rainwater, their first mindset is how do we get rid of this water as fast as possible? But what if we shift our mindset and say, how can we build infrastructure that embraces that and gives access to that water to the people so they could feel it, they could use it ceremonially, all of these type of things, which in water is a very important aspect, especially in my community, but I feel like it's an important aspect in all Indigenous communities, not only in the Arctic but also throughout the world. So it requires this you know, shift in narrative and shift in mindset that, you know, we've always been engineers and we've always been scientists. So, you know, those are the ways that I see it incorporated. I think it's on our end, it's already an incorporated thing, but it's kind of pushing that narrative in this like Western world that it needs to be better. Because I think for us, if it was that case, we would have definitely had an easier journey through STEM to get to where we are. But I hope that in my lifetime that we see that shift in narrative, especially with the climate crisis. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now going into the next question, which is a beautiful transition, is how can engineering fields better incorporate Indigenous perspectives and ways of knowing? We'll start with you, Akilah.
Yeah, I just got to say that I really love all the different perspectives going on this panel. It's so inspiring. We're really out here, you know, taking over these fields, so it's amazing. Yeah, so I feel like with XR technology particularly, it's kind of more about like human-centered design, also storytelling as well as really important, cognitive design as well. So I feel like part of this story and narrative is helping Indigenous communities get the funds to make these projects, which there's a great example of a game that it's not an XR game, but it's a game called Never Alone. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. But it was a game that had incorporated elders to basically tell part of the NUPX story, creation story, to help the user go through different parts of the creation story throughout the game. And this was a great example of how we can use modern technology to disseminate our language and culture. But also what was a really cool thing about it is that Never Alone enabled the NUPIEC to have access to the revenue that had generated from the game and alone was a pretty good monumental amount for the community to not really depend on tribal funding. I mean, to not depend on federal funding. So I feel like with language and culture dissemination, a lot of the history there, which goes back to my tribe, the Navajo Nation, which helped bring the US out of boarding school era, was from a group of people who wanted to revitalize and preserve the language and culture. And the way they were able to do that was through private funding, because federal funding had constantly turned them down to create their own school. So that's kind of like an example of how it's kind of that act of self-determination. And we look at our communities and we realize that there's not a lot of economic opportunity there. How can we as for me, you know, a technologist, how can we as technologists, creatives, create the economic opportunity in our reservations for our communities to storytell, to bring our image into modern media? So I kind of feel like with XR, there's a lot of room for growth and a lot of collaborative organizations in the XR technology field that are willing to support these diverse narratives. Part of that is just building the community, going out and talking with, you know, companies that are leading in this, in whatever field of engineering you are. For me, it's like going out and talking with companies who are leading in XR technology. And you'll go and find that even like the 4 founders of the inventors of virtual reality headsets, they're actually really willing to support Indigenous voices. So it's really cool. I think part of having that open mindset of that people are willing to support us is a huge part of that as well.
Fantastically said, Akilah. I'll pass it off to Gisella too.
I would say first, have somebody, an Indigenous in your team. That would be one thing that's important, because you have to not just listen to the community when you're proposing things, but really understanding how the community works. And I feel like there has been in the past a lot of attempts, right, to reach out to, okay, we'll design the system for you, and this is what we think that will work for you. And there was a lot of established communication and, you know, just meetings, but that does not add a lot of value without understanding from within. And when we're talking about environmental engineering, we're always concerned about sustainability. And I think the ones who actually understand the whole concept of being stewards of the land, which is something that we always, when we graduate as engineers, we claim that we are going to be. I think it's really the Indigenous communities, and that's something that we always need to keep it very like vivid in our minds.
Also wonderfully said. I'll pass it off to Charitie.
Yes, I completely agree. I think there needs to be more pathways to get more of us in this industry, but I also want to say engineering fields, it goes back to this like mindset but narrative shift, but it can even start with conversations internally with companies that it really matters how you treat people, how you treat communities, how you engage with people when you're going for RFPs, requests for proposals, but really like how you're working with communities. Because I think, especially with what I've seen with what happens in the Arctic, it's not an isolated issue in Alaska, which is where I'm from, but it's something that happens in Nunavut, in Canada, it happens in Greenland, where we see companies who don't know how to work with Native communities come into our communities and build infrastructure that is not acclimated to our environment. And we would tell them from phase 1, like, oh, you probably shouldn't use concrete pipes because, you know, concrete doesn't do well in the cold. And then boom, they build something with concrete pipes, and then it's like a building that we can't use at all. So then we're wasting money on our end, but it's because they don't know how to host those type of engagement meetings that are so necessary in projects. And this is something that won't, like, if we get this process and this idea of co-design well and incorporated at all firms, it wouldn't only just benefit our communities, it benefits everyone, because we're all human at the end of the day, and it really matters how you treat others. So engineering fields, they need to do better, and I think it requires that narrative shift. We need more of us in this industry, and I think what I see a lot is, especially with Native women and girls, but especially Native women and girls from the Arctic, is that when we kind of enter these spaces, the engineering space, it's very harsh reality from what we're used to, growing up surrounded by love, growing up surrounded by support, and kind of being, you know, joining a department and like, luckily for me, I didn't face a lot of competitiveness from my peers, where like all of us are really great friends, but it's like the ways that some of these professors, navigate these classes, it's not good. It's a very, especially with civil engineering, it's such an old industry. I feel like with other engineering industries, there's been a lot of evolvement and it's changed a lot. But with civil engineering, it's like very, and I think it could be better. I think it could be better. And I have a lot of hope, but it starts with that narrative shift, creating more pathways for more of us to be here, specifically for Native women and girls. And this co-design process, it really matters, how you treat people. And it can be an individual thing too. We really need to think about how we talk to each other, how we talk to community, especially in the workplace, because it matters. And yeah, I think those would be my 3 things to how engineering fields could better incorporate, our perspectives and our ways of knowing, because it would benefit not just us, but honestly, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charitie. Hopping off of what you just said, how can engineering fields better incorporate Indigenous perspectives and ways of knowing? And I'll curve that back to you, Charitie, and then we'll go from there.
Yes. Okay. Sorry if I feel like if I sound like I'm repeating myself, but again, it goes back to this idea of this co-design. And I think there is a lot to learn from on the shoulders of those who really created a pathway for us. And I always reference Douglas Cardinal, but even the way in which he does work, how he engages with community. When we're talking to tribal members, to Indigenous peoples, it's important that they're at the center of that work. So incorporating them at every design process throughout the thing, because what we've seen historically, especially with engineering projects, is that, they're building infrastructure that further marginalizes us. And it definitely happens throughout the Arctic still, but we also lose money because of that. We lose resources, we lose a school that we promised our children. These are things that we lose. So engineering fields really need to have a better co-design process. And I firmly believe that when we have more Native women and girls in this industry, kind of leading this industry, I think our world would be a lot better of a place. So again, referring back to those pathways, it's been really scary. I think it's also important to talk about, but the setback of DEI here in this country due to the current administration. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies pull back, which is really scary, and which also affects retention rates of our Native people, but especially that's like Native women and girls in this space. So I hope things get better, and that's like a whole different conversation. And even when I think about like where in Alaska, where we get our funding to continue to build our water infrastructure, what's currently happening is that the federal government is viewing that funding as a DEI thing when it's not related to that at all. Like, as Native people, but especially as Alaska Natives, Native Americans, we have this political status in this country. So the federal government, we're not DEI, period. So we need to ensure that is also reflected in the industries, in the STEM and engineering industries. But pretty much about everything I said before, it also applies to this question. There needs to be a huge shift in narrative, I think, for this better incorporation, or we can start our own thing and design our own things and have that led. I want to see more of that. I want to see more of us leading those type of firms, leading those type of companies, because when things are done by and for us, I think that's when things are great. Because in Alaska, that's what we see. ANTHC, the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, has a Department of Engineering with many Native people working, many Native engineers, and these are the people that are building our water infrastructure for our communities and have been building our water infrastructure for the past 50, 60 years. It's incredible. We need more of that. I want to see that scaled up all throughout the country, but also all throughout the world, because when you have people from those communities working and becoming engineers and leading that, I think those projects go a lot better and we're able to keep the promises that we made to our communities.
Thank you so much, Charitie. And I just realized I just asked the same question, but if anyone, does anyone else have anything to add on that point? If not, I can move to the next question.
Yeah, I just got to say that, like right now, I to attend this panel discussion, I took a moment out of a building design meeting right now for the Albuquerque Visitor Center for Route 66, which has a lot of overlay of Indigenous trails trading systems, right? And I think that part of that is that kind of like what Charitie was saying, the way you communicate with people really matters, and the way that you like the narrative that you're telling really matters as well. I think that when you kind of communicate that you're trying to do the specific goal for Indigenous language and culture revitalization through XR technology for years, it's like then pretty soon you have like the city of Albuquerque hitting you up because they want you to help design. You know, it's part of how you communicate with people and how you treat people really matters in, I think, whatever field you want. Relationship building is so valuable. And that enables, that kind of opens the door as well for people to invite you in to be like, oh, we need to make sure that we're including Indigenous voices in while this building is being designed, you know? So I just got to throw that out there as well. I think just like the way you really communicate matters.
Yes, thank you, Akilah. So we're gonna start with Gisella on this next question, and it's when you face setbacks or imposter syndrome, what keeps you motivated to continue pushing forward?
Yeah, and that's great. Like it continues what they were just talking about. I feel like in terms of setbacks, imposter syndrome, there was a time that I was really interested in reading and understanding more imposter syndrome, and because everybody kept talking about it. And I'll be honest that I do have imposter feelings, and that's because you're always the first one or the only one in the room. But I don't think that I like the idea of calling imposter syndrome that often, because it's a way of normalizing or rationalizing the fact that people are being mean to us. And it's like, oh, it's just you, and then whatever. But I don't think that's true. And I think one of the things that pushes me to keep moving forward is knowing that in some funny way, I'm the role model to somebody, and I'll be important to somebody, because as you progress, being the first one on everything, you need special engineering sponsorship. So in order for you to be promoted, it's never on merit. So all this conversation about merit that's going on in the news, that's just hypocrisy. So it's always somebody sponsoring you. And if you don't have somebody to really believe in you, this is really hard. So I want to be the person that would actually do that for others, Indigenous girls and women. So then what I used to hate, absolutely, any type of leadership roles. I don't think I fit the mold. But when you are in leadership roles, that's when you actually have meaningful changes. And so now I choose carefully which ones to take, but I accept them more because I know the impact that it will have on others. And sorry, but I just get very like passionate about this topic.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I'll pass it off to Charitie.
Yeah, sorry for repeating my answer to that question. I didn't realize it's been such a long day. Also came from work for this. Yeah, I think there's a lot of vulnerability and power, and I had a really hard time in undergrad at Columbia. I did good academically, but it was just like I always talk about this one specific experience I had with a professor in my sophomore year, who pretty much told me that I wouldn't become a successful engineer during an office hour. And when you hear that as a young Native woman and as a young Native girl, it's so hard to talk about so early in your career. It's hard. And I remember walking outside of an engineering building and immediately like calling my mom. And she told me this one thing that I share everywhere. But she described how my great-grandfather, Inaka, who's Yupik, he relocated our entire community, but she would tell me that he built sod houses out of wood, mud, and water, and he built kayaks out of driftwood, while my great-grandmother, Annan, sewed the seal skin onto that. And this kayak was able to withstand some of the harshest conditions in the ocean, but was also able to bring in a harvest for our community. She told me that this knowledge is the reason why I'm here today. And it's the reason why I'm breathing, I'm living, and that no other knowledge, no other say, no words from for a lack of better language, from a white professor could hold any authority over how I came to be. And that knowledge I hold within my heart and my blood. And she would tell me that I was born of that. I was born of engineers. Not this idea of like what's successful in the Western world. And so if my mom hadn't told me that story my sophomore year, I don't think I would have graduated. It's hard, especially when you're a Native girl. And for me, I became one of the first Alaskan Native women to graduate for my department, and also one of the first Polynesian women. My dad is from Samoa. So for me, it meant a lot because I want to see more girls that kind of grow up with the cultures that I do enter that space. But it's hard. And will they hear those things too? Probably. And it's terrible. They shouldn't hear those type of things. So I think I'm also really passionate about, we need more Native women and girls in this space. And again, I had that support system, the support of my community. And I always tell people that the noise of support was so much more louder than that of doubt and hate that came from like this. I'm not going to name him, but that one environmental engineering professor. And I ended up, I don't like defining this success, but am I successful now? Yes. Like, I wish he could see where I'm at now, but it's like, we're not doing these things to prove people wrong. We're doing these things so that we see other younger girls follow us, and we're creating realities where we no longer have to say we're the purpose. So I'm really proud of that. But I wanted to share that story too, because for many of us Native people, the ways that we live is engineering. And sometimes if you have to tell yourself that every day, do it so you can get to the next class, you can get through to the next test. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but I just wanted to share that. And again, I'm really thankful to my mom and to the Native women who, really help us get to where we are, because Native women are incredible and have always been for a long time. So yeah.
Yes, the positivity speaks way louder than the negativity. I'm going to pass it on to Akilah.
Yeah, all of that was beautifully said. So I think that like imposter syndrome. So for me personally, I come from a non-traditional STEM background. I have a BFA from the University of New Mexico. And when I graduated, I immediately moved home to take care of my grandma into hospice for 4 years. So, and when she passed away, I really wanted to just pursue my lifelong goal to, create community-based media. And XR technology was just something I fell in love with. And I come from a non-traditional STEM background, but I was reflecting on this a few days ago. Like, I think all of us are here for a reason. Diné creator, they put us here for a reason. I look at any other different field I may have pursued in my life, but for some reason with XR technology, everything is just falling into place. And I think that with imposter syndrome, I look at our ancestors. For me personally, my paternal grandparents and my maternal grandparents, they were community leaders. My paternal grandparents, they helped develop some of the very first community-based schools in the United States. So I look at that as well for power to look back on, as well as I look at it. I was raised traditionally, so a lot of our traditional ceremonies and songs, they're all songs about empowerment, about abundance, and about success, and about how you do climb to the top of the mountain and you feel successful up there while you're living in oneness with your environment. So I think that positive mindset, that there's songs for our Nayet Nezane, for our monster slayer songs, our warrior songs. All of our songs are evoking this energy that you are that infinite possibility that exists. And I think having that reminder integrated into our DNA is what really allows me to say I do belong here. Like I do have a voice at the table. So I think just going back to the ancestral knowledge, like today the modern science is finally catching up to the neuroscience that we have known forever. you know? So it's really exciting to just tap into that inner greatness that our ancestors knew.
Thank you all. Y'all are making me want to cry because of all this fantastic information. And this next question might actually make me go off camera. If you could go back and give advice to your younger self when you were starting STEM or you were going into your first day of classes, what would you tell them? And I'll pass it off to Akilah.
For sure. So I think I kind of just got to draw back on some of the or reference some of the previous things I had said, kind of more so to like the neuroscience that our people had known in this thought of positive thinking, really how it has a cognitive outcome on your reality. For Navajo people specifically, we had known this through the different cycles of planning, which was Nsaha case thinking, not planning, ina doing it, and then sihasin faith. So this is basically a pathway of how quantum physics works. And I think that it draws back to our songs, our prayers, and how they do, like I was talking about, how it evokes you into this emotional state of being, of limitlessness, basically. And that's how the ancestors were able to heal people, to help, you know, make different situations, different outcomes for people to a positive outcome. And how neuroscience and quantum physics is finally trying to prove this amazed me. So drawing off of that information, if I was younger, the advice I would give myself is that I would have fixed a lot of the limiting beliefs that were going on when I was younger. Once I've started doing that now, within the past few years, how much success I'm seeing is just, it's crazy. It's unimaginable. So I think just really believing in yourself, self-care, self-love, telling yourself that you are great at whatever you do, that, you know, you do deserve a seat at the table. Just those kind of like narratives that our ancestors constantly fed ourselves, positive affirming narratives, as opposed to when the Western narratives of a lot of negativity and stuff like that, and scarcity. So I think that just paying attention to the mind shift, the narrative that you're telling yourself, is the most important thing.
See, I told you, I'm already getting teary-eyed. I'm going to pass it off to Gisella now.
I think for me is really, I mean, I would just repeat Akilah's words, but really believe in yourself and your passions, because you know, one thing that really stuck to me is I have always been very artistic, and it didn't make sense to me like how combining two things, until I started realizing that I started visiting the community, and well, my ancestors built pyramids and they are like amazing. And then knowing that they could actually do those things and think about the artistic side of things as well was kind of like eye-opening for me, because it was like, okay, it makes sense. And then as an engineer, we kind of have a stereotype, but I'm too human to be an engineer or to match that stereotype. And it never really made sense. And like Charity said, I did have a professor on the first semester that said I would never make it in engineering. And so that always stuck in my mind. And now I'm a faculty member. So, and I'm very, what they call it, very full of empathy, which is not the norm. And it's still okay. And I would just say, just believe in that. I think you're doing the right thing. And I really like these conversations that we're having, because it makes me realize how important my job is, even if I'm not in the field anymore, but here in academia, that there's a lot of work that we need to do to make sure that we not only employ Indigenous girls and women, but also help them through that process and retain them in the field.
Absolutely, Gisella. You as faculty and staff are extremely valuable. I'm going to pass it off to Charity right now.
Yeah. Oh, this is a hard question to answer. I think when we're young, and especially being young girls, we internalize a lot of things, and sometimes we internalize things, uh, especially things that are said outside of our homes, whether it's in the classroom or in school or through our advocacy. For me, I definitely internalized a lot of that when I was a young girl, but it's important to really honor the promises that you made as a young person, as a child, and to really honor the dreams that you had as a young child. And I think I don't want to speak for all of us, but I could see the ways in which all of you have really honored the promises that you made when you were young, and it's inspiring for me. And for myself, I remember being like 4 and 5 and saying, I want to be an engineer. I want to be a leader. And now that I'm reflecting on that, especially yesterday, I was at the UN for a CSW event, really speaking on behalf of my community, but I had the opportunity to speak there, and I think I had this full circle moment being like, if like 5-year-old you can see where you are now, I think they'd be really proud. And I think if I had the opportunity to go back and tell myself, I just would say, you're gonna grow up to become everything they told you couldn't. This system, this Western system, because being Native and being a Native woman and being a Native girl is living in a world where, your people were never meant to be here, but we are. And then being a Native girl in STEM is being in an industry that's never seen someone like you. But keep going, find community, find other women who are also pursuing that industry. And really remember also the promises you made to your community. Come back home. My mom always told me, because sometimes I feel guilty about having to leave home all the way to New York City. And she told me that home will always be there, and that the experiences that you have, especially in high school, graduating high school, pursuing college, to do whatever, to travel the world and to come back, because home will always be there. So that's kind of the advice and advice that I've learned so far in my 23 years of life to everyone. You got this. Don't internalize the things that the system tries to force you to internalize when you're young. You can do it. Just work hard and go to office hours if you're an undergrad or grad. Definitely go to office hours. Get to know your professors. They can end up being lifelong mentors. So I'm really thankful for the mentors I have in the civil engineering department at Columbia. They're incredible, but I also wouldn't have made it past the finish line without them. So that's some advice I would give to everyone. And yeah, Liana, thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives. We are going to open up the chat to see if anyone has any questions. If you do, you can just drop them directly in the chat, or you can put them in the Q&A section. So we'll give you all a little bit of time to put some things in there. Oh, we have one. So this is open to everyone. Elizabeth, do you want to navigate this question?
Yeah, so before we move on to the Q&As, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience? Was there something that you really wanted us to ask you, but we didn't? And this is open floor.
I had one last piece of advice. I think in Alaska, there's this cultural value of like being humble. I take that very seriously, but also, especially in this day and age where, for lack of better language, I see many, the climate space is crazy. I see a lot of white climate people, posting things. Really be proud of your accomplishments, even if it's small things. Post about it, get a LinkedIn, be your biggest advocate, do it. I think for me, I didn't want to, I was like, oh, I gotta be humble, you gotta stay demure. No, do not be demure. If you've accomplished anything, you get a good grade on a midterm, announce it. Like, be proud, so I just want to share, be active on social media. Obviously, if you want to do that, get a LinkedIn for sure, connect with people. That's how people find you. That's how you get connected to opportunities. So definitely tap into like the digital media space. Sorry if I sound like very Gen Z with that, but I really, want to push for that kind of for me when I was kind of figure out how to navigate this space. I was like, maybe I shouldn't post this or say this online. Do it. Like, we need more of it. We need more representation. And for sometimes there are many people online. That's how you can get opportunities. So that'd be my last piece of advice. I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, I gotta second that. In a digital age, definitely LinkedIn is awesome. You can pull out the QR code on LinkedIn and have people just scan your QR code and you're connected already. Like, it's a great resource for sure.
And I think the professional organizations like SACNAS and SWE are so instrumental for us not to feel isolated. I'm so thankful, especially for the Indigenous Peoples AG, that has been really a great way of support, family, and community to me all these years.
Yes, thank you. I don't see any questions coming into the chat. Oh, I do see one. We do have one question. Do you truly believe that this... Oh, give me one moment to read
I
this.
think we could rephrase the question to say, how can we navigate through this space as women in a male-dominated kind of industry, kind of a male-dominated field? And how can men in this field make you feel more accepted and protected? It takes some time to think, so whoever wants to answer first.
Yeah, I could go first. This is not my quote, but I heard it from a speaker. And let me put it this way. There's not enough white men in this world to fill all the engineering jobs that could possibly happen. So if you're in an environment in which this is not happening, you probably shouldn't be there. Because I think culturally speaking for companies, I always tell my students, if it's a company that doesn't feel like you want to go there and work with joy, you probably shouldn't be there. I know it's hard. Sometimes we have no choice because we have to stay in the environment we are, like moving it's harder, but you don't have to deal with that. I feel it's more like comes from a place of pain and work in an environment which you don't have any value. But then in order for you to make that change, I think that you don't need to do this alone. There are like various places like SACNAS, for example, is a great one. SWE has been instrumental to me to make me realize that I have a certain value in the place that I work. But I feel like, this conversation is ongoing for so many years. Misogyny is real. I feel really sorry for my students because I had amazing male colleagues. We're friends even today. We play the lottery every year so that we can win at the end of the year. But they don't have the same. And there's like, I feel like it's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. There's like these two groups. Girls do together and then boys stick together and they don't really collaborate with each other. As a matter of fact, they actually start fighting during classes. And I'm like, why is this happening? What is it we're doing wrong as moms, taking care of our kids and our sons and not teaching them the right thing? It doesn't make sense to me, but I feel like you don't have to stay in that place. I feel like there's always a better place to do that.
Yeah. I feel like so with the XR technology industry, I think that it might be a lot more forward thinking than these older engineering structures. I think that definitely as Indigenous people, a lot of us are matriarchal. The Diné people are matriarchal, and I really think about the female leaders that come from my community. So that's really inspiring. And I think that just knowing your worth as a female, as someone who identifies as female that's going into these fields, really makes the difference, like the confidence that you got to have in yourself. A medicine man had said one time that our ancestors had so much confidence that they went to the White House and really made their voice heard. That's how much confidence they had. And they barely spoke English, you know, and they made real monumental impact doing that. So if we can just evoke that confidence within ourselves as females, I think that that really makes the difference as well. And then how men can support us is, I think that just supporting our ideas and not stealing our ideas. I've had someone do that before where like I would like voice all my ideas and then he would go back to the supervisor and pitch it as his ideas. So don't do that. Give us our moment to shine when we have our great ideas, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think you both answered it perfectly. Men just need to make space. And yeah, I'm so sorry that happened. Men that acting like they should not be acting like little colonizers in the workplace and stealing ideas, period. So yeah, you guys answered it beautifully.
Thank you guys all for your answers and inputs. Our last question is before we wrap up today. Where did it go? Okay. Were there cultural or traditional expectations that made it difficult for you to focus on education, and how did you navigate those?
Yeah, I wanted to say sometimes it feels like, and I think this goes back to how we internalize things as young people, but it may feel like you have to sacrifice parts of your culture in pursuit of them, but I want to reaffirm that you do not have to do that. And for me, it was ANSEP had a really huge impact on me. It really helps out a lot of Native kids back home in Alaska. That's how I was. That program's crazy. It was a lot too sometimes. I think STEM in general can be a lot when you're like 11, 10, 13 doing that every year. But you don't have to sacrifice parts of your culture when you're learning calculus or Calc 3 or linear algebra. Really, sometimes to stay rooted and to focus on your well-being, you have to return back to the land, go back to your traditions. And for me, that was a big help. Learning my language in the state of Alaska, Yupik is the second most spoken language in the state after English. It's nowhere like that anywhere else in the US. We're very proud people. It's a style I like sharing with everyone, but also from the Southwest too. But it's Southwest of Alaska. It's, these are things, these traditions, your ways of learning your cultural practices. They don't have to be a barrier in STEM. And I would, I think it involves like personal mindset and how we view it. We could do it for spiritual well-being needs, but sometimes that's what we need to be good up here. And in order to do good STEM work, we have to be good up here and we have to be good here. So definitely tap in. Like growing up, I learned how to use luck, which is like our traditional dancing, lighting a seal oil lamp, which is like how way back then our people used to light our homes that way. It's something that's being revitalized. And even our dancing, it's like something that used to be illegal by the federal government, yet it's now a huge practice and a huge part of who we are now. So it doesn't have to be a barrier. It's not a barrier, definitely tap in, find someone who, find an elder, listen to your elders and really learn from them and learn from that community.
You, Charity, do you, either of you to have an answer to this question?
I think that that's good. Just kind of want to respect everyone's time as well. But yeah, that was amazing. I think culture and language really, for me personally, has uplifted me so much. So I give thanks.
Gisella, any comments to the question?
I think that for many difficult for education, like family comes first, and it's really hard to put in that place because things are so demanding. But one thing that I was gonna say is that I am originally from Peru, and there's over 5 million indigenous people in there. And there's probably more, but we have been stripped from our culture, and I feel like some are ashamed. For most of my life, I could not say I was indigenous until I found this group in SWE. Like I didn't have the courage to go against my family and say, yes, we are. We have been here for over 500 years. And you know, those things like you try to adapt to the new world and fit in, but you don't. And then I think that you just have to embrace it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I wanted to do a quick closeout. Thank you everybody who has joined us. As we wrap up today's incredible discussion, I want to extend a huge thank you to our amazing speakers, Akilah Martinez, Charitie Ropati, and Dr. Gisella Lamas, for sharing your stories, your insights, and sharing some wisdom with us. Your journeys are truly inspiring, and we appreciate the time and the knowledge that you've shared with us today. I want to thank all of you, our attendees, for joining us and being a part of the conversation, especially those who are watching the recording. We encourage you to keep the dialogue going and to continue supporting Indigenous voices in STEM. You can do that by becoming a member with SACNAS and with SWE. I did drop some links into the chat. The Society of Women Engineers Indigenous Peoples Affinity Group is a fantastic resource. Another society that I love to mention is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. All three of these fantastic organizations can work together in helping you lift yourself up as an Indigenous professional in the STEM fields or STEM adjacent fields.